One of the things I've been wanting to ask you is about your experience in Africa, to the shamanic tradition there.
Right.
And why you went there, whether it was after you had the Hawaiian training, or whether it was during, or just speaking, what was it like and how did it differ and all those things?
Well, that's a long story now. Okay, I don't know if we'll have time for all of that. But basically, I went there after I'd been trained by my father and by my auntie, my first training with her. Okay? So I had considerable background before I went. Now, at the time, I was still learning, and so I thought that it was almost accidental that I went there. Okay? I was still very naive in those days, even. But I took a job with an organization that I was in. First of all, I was in graduate school training for overseas work. Okay, so I was preparing for that, expecting to go to Asia or South America because of my background. I interviewed with one organization, and they offered immediate overseas work right after graduation. During the interview, I was asked if I would want to go to Africa, because although at the time I spoke Chinese and I spoke Spanish, and I was very good in both of them, way back in my background I had a little bit of French, and they desperately needed somebody in Africa. And since I had never been there before, didn't know anything whatsoever about it, of course I said yes. Okay? And most wonderful of all, however, was when I came home and I told Gloria, my wife, how would you like to go to Africa? And she said, how do we pack? Okay? No fuss, right? So we shortly found ourselves in Africa. And so we were there for 7 years. Now, not long after we were there, I was told by my auntie that someone would contact me, and under the circumstances, I thought it would be through dreams, and at first it was. But not too long after we were there, I met the man who was going to be my mentor for the next 7 years. It was a Hausa trader. He traded in African artifacts. And the first time he just showed up at the house, and we negotiated. My French was very poor, except that during 3 hours of negotiation, I remember telling Gloria afterwards when he left, why, I don't know what happened, but it was like I could speak fluently the whole time, okay? And then he showed up later. I had to take many trips in the bush as part of my job, and he showed up later, and then sort of introduced himself, and then from there we went on to lots of other stuff. How it differed, the basic concepts of shamanism are the same. How it differed were the applications, of course. From him, I learned some very powerful things that are still in use, among them what we call grokking, and also locating energy sites for healing, lots of other things. And also I learned a tremendous amount, more than I wanted to, about sorcery, because that's where it's still alive and not kicking, but ruling. Okay, very, very much alive. And so I learned a pretty tremendous amount about that whole area. Okay? We were in Dahomey to begin with, and Dahomey is the home of voodoo, where voodoo came from, where voodoo in the name of Vodun is very much alive today, and not what most people think it is. And also what most people think it is. It's pretty much of a paradox. Sorry about that. But let's put it this way. It's a lot more than what people think it is. Okay? But some of the things they think it is, yeah, do exist. Except I can tell you zombies come from, it's drugs. Yeah. Doesn't change much, but it's based on drugs. Okay?
The sorcery aspect.
Yes.
Does not apply over here in the tradition, or does it?
No, that's not true. There were people who had some knowledge. They're wrongly called kahunas, except in certain instances. I'll explain. No, the sorcery tradition was over here. Anytime you have people who have some understanding of the mind, of energy, of spirit, and a limited understanding and a greedy heart. Okay. And I've learned to take advantage of people's fears and ignorance. You'll find some form of sorcery. And so that existed here as well. After, the Hawaiians in 1819 overthrew their whole religion, their major religion. Tore down the temples, burned or gave away all the temple images, kicked out the priests. Well, many of the priests, most of them, reintegrated into society. Some of them were wandering out there without anything to do. And so some of them turned to sorcery. That is, using these esoteric arts for pay and for harm. And so that was a bad time. And from that time is where kahunas got a very bad reputation. Not only because the missionaries were pounding on it, but also because of the actions of some of the former priests. Okay. So yeah, there is that tradition here. And many Hawaiians still today are very afraid of anything having to do with Huna, kahuna, or the old ways.
Serge, doesn't Molokai have a tradition of a lot of those black kahunas as magical?
Unfortunately, that's distorted. Yeah, they do. They do have that tradition. Molokai had the tradition of the most kahunas, because many of the kahuna schools, remember, kahuna is a title, something like doctor, that designates an expert in a particular field. And there are many kinds of kahunas, and so these kahunas had to go to, these people who wanted to be kahunas or experts had to go to school. Molokai had many of the schools for the different traditions, and had the reputation of having the most powerful kahunas of all types. And some of those types were sorcerers. Molokai has a long tradition of sorcery with one of the great healers called a kaula, which is somewhat like a kupua. Usually it's described as prophet, but it means somebody who had the abilities of clairvoyance, of also sometimes called magic. And there was one called Lanikeha. And Lanikeha lived on one end of Molokai. And one of the traditions is that he went to Lanai to rid it of evil spirits, which might also have been sorcerers. Okay. In doing so, he got rid of them there, and they flew over into these trees on Molokai and entered these trees, and these trees became sorcerer trees, poisonous trees. Okay? The real legend, however, specifies the trees. So if those trees are no longer existing, then that evil no longer exists. But you know how legends go. And so now certain types of trees by some people are considered dangerous, inherently spiritually dangerous. And so yeah, there's a lot of different sorcery type of traditions in these islands. And there were specialists, kahuna specialists, who would also specialize in counter sorcery. And so that's sometimes how bad it got. There were those who specialized in undoing it.
There were tikis that they put fingernails in and hair clippings in,
Sure.
which sound voodoo-like.
Sure, but those could be used for healing or harm. Okay? And there's a lot more behind that, but anyway, so the figures themselves might be used either way. It was the practitioner. The harm was in the practitioner. There's only one word for evil in Hawaiian, really for evil, and that's ino, and it means to willfully do harm to someone. Okay? There's no such thing as an evil thing. There are only evil actions.
But back to the principles is that all power comes from within, just to remind everybody that nothing really evil can happen to you unless you allow it to.
Well, allow it, unless you're, yes, that's true, but allowing comes also from fear. The more you are afraid of it, the more you will, according to our tradition, the more you will create those effects within yourself. You will believe in them, you will be afraid of them, and you'll do all the dirty work. This is what I found in Africa. No matter how powerful the sorcerer was, he had to work on the fear and ignorance of the people he was working on. And this is real sorcery, okay? If that didn't work, he'd send out someone to poison them. Okay? And if that didn't work, he'd use an assassin. I mean, they didn't fool around, okay? And so this idea that, oh, there are people who have such powerful force with their minds that they can do anything to anybody, not true at all. All they can do is send a message. If you accept that message, you create the harm yourself. It's the same thing with all these rocks that people send back from the mainland. You know, they go to the big island, they pick up a rock, knowing they're not supposed to, because if they didn't know they were not supposed to, they would never send them back. See? And so they send these rocks, and they have some kind of bad luck happens, and they send them back. I don't know if they're still doing it, but they used to get tons of rocks every year over on the big island. I even had someone send me something. They sent me some green sand that they had bought on the big island as a tourist thing, and had some bad luck, and were afraid because of what they'd heard about taking any of the rocks from the islands, and sent it back to me to get rid of it. So even over here they send me stuff. And all of this is their own fear. Because, I'm not giving away any secrets here, Pele doesn't care if you take a rock. The rock might care, so I always recommend asking it first. But, you know, that's not a Pele tradition. That's not an old Hawaiian tradition. The Hawaiian tradition is that everything is alive and you have to treat it with respect. And rocks have a lot of power. And you need to treat them with respect. But it is against the law to take a rock from a national park. Realize that? In the United States, it's against the law to take a rock, a leaf, a twig, anything from a national park. And so there was a very creative park ranger who combined that with a legend about one small beach on the big island and turned it into this whole Pele will get you if you take any rocks. Okay? And so there's a tremendous amount of people out there suffering from guilt and fear. But obviously, in spite of all the rocks that were taken, there's not enough rocks to account for all the tourists that have been through the national park. So that fear has not affected everybody, clearly. Okay? Yeah.
I heard that that's true with the Grand Canyon, too. They send rocks back because of that same tradition.
They got a tradition like that there, too? Oh, clever. Okay.
Yeah. A ranger started it.
A ranger started, yeah. Well, he probably looked at, oh, it's very successful in Hawaii, so. Yeah.